The phone rang 3 times before Christopher picked up. "Dad, I can't do dinner tonight," he said, not even bothering to sound sorry. "Buried in permit paperwork, you know how it is." I told him it was fine. I told him the business comes first. I always tell him that. I'm Harvey Phillips. I'm 70 years old. I built Phillips Development out of a rusted-out pickup truck and a stack of unpaid bills back in 1984. Tonight was my birthday, and my son had just lied straight to my face. I know it was a lie because 20 minutes later, sitting alone at Prosperity Steakhouse downtown, the host walked up to me smiling. "Mr. Phillips, happy birthday. Right this way. Your son's party is already seated." My son's party. I found them in the back booth. Christopher in a tailored suit, laughing, his wife Danielle leaning on his shoulder with a glass of champagne, and across from them, tearing into a lobster tail like she owned the place, was Danielle's mother, Zara. 3 empty champagne bottles, a seafood tower the size of a tire, and sitting right on top of the check, my company card. I stood behind a pillar and listened. "Please," Christopher was saying, rolling his eyes, "my dad's basically checked out. Doesn't have a clue what happens outside his office anymore." Zara laughed so hard she nearly choked on her wine. "That's why we love this deal, sweetheart. Old man doesn't watch the books anymore." I didn't wait to hear the rest. I walked up to that table, picked my company card off the silver tray, and snapped it in half in front of all 3 of them. Nobody said a word. I dropped the broken pieces on Zara's plate and walked out. Before I tell you what happened after that, where I'm from, watching me sit in that car afterwards, hands shaking, not from sadness, but from something colder, let me know in the comments if you've ever caught family talking about you like you weren't in the room. Hit like and subscribe, because what my son did with that card was nothing compared to what I found once I started digging. I didn't sleep that night. Sitting in my dark office on the top floor of the Phillips Tower, I started pulling threads. Small things I'd ignored for months. Expense reports Christopher rushed me to sign without reading. Vendor names I didn't recognize. A consulting firm that billed us every month for work nobody could point to. By 6 a.m., I had my attorney, Kean Russell, on the phone. "I need every transaction Christopher has touched in the last 2 years, I told him. "Quietly, nobody in accounting hears about this." Kean didn't ask why. He just said, "Give me until noon." At 9:15, Christopher walked into my office holding 2 coffees, wearing yesterday's rumpled shirt, playing the part of the exhausted, dutiful son perfectly. He apologized. He blamed Danielle. He blamed Zara. He promised he'd pay the company back by Friday. I told him I understood. Family is complicated. I told him we'd celebrate properly this weekend. He smiled like he'd gotten away with something. He had no idea that 45 minutes later, Kean would walk back into my office, not with an apology, but with 6 inches of bank statements. And what was in them wasn't a dinner bill. It was $840,000. Kean dropped the stack of statements on my desk like it was a body. We were in my home study now, not the office. I didn't trust the office anymore. Wood-paneled walls, the reading lamp low, just me and him and a bottle of bourbon I hadn't touched. $840,000, Kean said, funneled over 14 months to a company called Everline Consulting. Every invoice signed off by Christopher personally. I asked him what Everline actually did for us. "Nothing," Kean said. "No blueprints, no reports, no deliverables. I checked the shared drives myself. It's a ghost." I flipped to the incorporation papers. Everline Consulting, registered in Wyoming 11 months ago. 1 listed owner. Zara. Not a distant cousin, not a business partner. Danielle's own mother running a fake company that billed my business for strategic advising nobody ever gave.
I sat back and let that settle. This wasn't a son panicking over a dinner bill. This was planned, patient, ugly. "There's more," Kian said, and I could hear it in his voice, the kind of tone a man uses right before he hands you something he wishes he didn't have to. He slid over a single-wire transfer record, $40,000 sent 2 weeks ago to a private medical office on Cherry Creek. I didn't recognize the name on it, Dr. Owen Castile. "I had someone pull public records," Kian said. "Castile's a neurologist, specializes in cognitive assessments, dementia, capacity evaluations." My stomach dropped before my mind caught up. "Harvey," Kian said quietly, "I think they're building a paper trail to say you're losing your mind." I laughed. I actually laughed, sitting there in my study at 1 in the morning, because it was so stupid it almost sounded made up. Then I thought about Christopher at the boardroom podium next month for the annual shareholder review. I thought about the company bylaws I wrote myself 30 years ago, the incapacity clause, the one that lets the VP take emergency control if the CEO is medically certified unfit. I built that clause to protect the company from outsiders. Never once did I think my own son would use it against me. "I want eyes on everything," I told Kian. "Christopher's calls, his emails, whatever legal channel gets us there fastest. And get me whoever's good at digging through financial ghosts." Kian said he knew a guy, Alexander, used to work forensic fraud for a bank downtown before he went independent. Expensive, careful, and clean. Nothing he touched ever came back to bite you in court. I called Alexander myself the next morning from the Phillips Tower parking garage, sitting in my car so nobody upstairs would see my face. He agreed to start that afternoon. By 6 that evening, I was back in my office, watching Christopher through the glass wall as he laughed with 2 other directors like nothing in the world was wrong. My assistant, Jennifer, who'd worked for me for 18 years, knocked and stepped in with a folder. "Mr. Phillips," she said, "Christopher asked me to schedule a call with a Dr. Castile's office for you next Tuesday. Said it was a routine checkup you'd requested." I hadn't requested anything. I smiled at her and told her that was fine. Go ahead and book it. I wasn't going to run from this. I wasn't going to call the police tonight and end it clean and quiet. My son wanted to convince a boardroom full of people that I was losing my mind. Fine, I'd give him exactly what he was asking for. I picked up my phone and texted Alexander one line. "Start pulling everything on Everline and Castile. I want it airtight before he ever stands up in that boardroom." Then I sat back in my chair and watched my son through that glass wall, laughing, completely unaware that the trap he thought he was building had just become the one closing around him.
For the next week, I played a part. I started small. I called Jennifer by the wrong name during a Monday meeting. I lost the folder I'd been holding 30 seconds earlier. I asked Christopher to repeat numbers he just explained, rubbing my temple like the words weren't landing. It felt disgusting, pretending to fall apart in front of people who'd known me for 20 years. But I needed Christopher relaxed, confident, slappy. And it worked faster than I expected. By Wednesday, Alexander had pulled full call logs and texts between Christopher, Danielle, and Zara. Kian sat across from me in the study, reading the transcripts out loud in a flat voice, like a man reading a eulogy he didn't want to give. "Zara, he's basically doing our job for us. Just keep feeding Castile's report and we're golden." Christopher, board meetings in 9 days. Once they see the diagnosis, the incapacity clause kicks in automatic. I'm in. Danielle, then we finally redo the West Wing. I'm so tired of asking permission for everything. I read that last line twice. My own daughter-in-law, tired of asking permission, while living in a house I bought outright, driving a car I financed, working a job at my company that didn't exist before I created it for her. Kian set the paperwork down and looked at me. "This is enough for a police report right now, Harvey. Fraud, forged medical documents, conspiracy. We don't need to wait for the board meeting." I told him no. He didn't like that answer. Neither did I, honestly. But I spent 40 years building this company by staying 3 steps ahead of men who wanted to take it from me, and I wasn't going to hand my son a soft landing now. A police report today gets him a lawyer, a delay, a plea deal, and 2 years in a minimum security cell reading magazines. That's not justice. That's a nap. I wanted him to stand up in front of the board, the people who trusted him, who'd shake his hand at Christmas parties, and watch it all collapse in real time. So I gave him something better than mercy. I gave him rope. Thursday morning, I called Christopher into my office and slid a folder across the desk. Inside was a real deal, a warehouse district redevelopment site out past Commerce City, projected at $15 million, one of the best opportunities Phillips Development had seen in years. "I want you to take this one under your own name," I told him, voice trembling on purpose. "Set up your own LLC. Company will guarantee the loan. Consider it an early inheritance before I can't make these calls anymore." I watched his face. The greed hit him so fast he barely bothered hiding it. "Dad, are you sure?" "I'm sure of less and less these days, son, but I'm sure about this." He left my office holding that folder like it was a winning lottery ticket. I already knew, because Alexander had flagged it an hour earlier, that the Commerce City parcel sat on the site of an old industrial plant shut down in the 70s. The state had quietly listed it as a contaminated remediation site 3 weeks ago. Public record, but buried deep enough that nobody without a reason to look would ever find it. Christopher wasn't going to find it either, not with dollar signs in his eyes. That night, Alexander sent me the surveillance feed from Christopher's car. He was already on the phone with Zara before he hit the parking garage exit. "He's handing me $15 million, Christopher laughed, so hard he could barely get the words out. "Under my own company, guaranteed by Phillips Development. Old man doesn't even know what day it is anymore." Zara's voice came through cold and sharp. "Don't let the board guarantee it. If they touch the paperwork, they'll want oversight, maybe even a cut. Use Everline as the cross-guarantor instead. Mortgage the house if you have to. Keep it all outside Phillips Development. Keep it all for us." I sat in my study with that recording playing on a loop, and for the first time since the steakhouse, I actually smiled. They were about to remove my company from the deal completely, voluntarily, which meant when the ground underneath that property turned out to be worthless, poisoned, and legally radioactive with cleanup liability, none of it would touch Phillips Development. It would land on exactly 2 names, Christopher and Everline. I picked up the phone and called Kian. "Get the paperwork ready," I said. "They're about to sign their own trap. I just need to know the second the ink's dry." Kian was quiet for a second. Then he asked me the same question he'd been asking me all week. "And when it's dry, Harvey, what then?" I looked out the window at the Denver skyline, lights flickering on one by one as the sun went down. "Then we let the board meeting happen exactly the way Christopher planned it, except I'm the one who's going to walk in with the real diagnosis." The signatures went through on a Friday afternoon. Alexander watched it happen in real time. Christopher and Zara sitting in Christopher's home office, logging into the lender's portal and signing the Commerce City loan documents one screen at a time. Christopher mortgaged his own house to cover the initial liquidity, just like Zara told him to. Everline was listed as cross-guarantor on the rest. Not one line mentioned Phillips Development. They'd cut my company out completely, all on their own, exactly like I hoped. I called Kian that night. "It's done," I said. "They own it. All of it." "Then it's time," Kian said. The annual shareholder board meeting was 5 days out. I spent those 5 days finishing my performance, forgetting names, misplacing files, letting Christopher walk me through simple numbers like I was a child. Every director on that board had known me for 20 decades. I could see the pity in their eyes when they looked at me now, and every bit of it made my stomach turn. But pity was exactly what I needed them holding on to until the moment it mattered. The morning of the meeting, I sat in the boardroom on the 40th floor of Phillips Tower, hunched a little in my chair, my suit jacket slightly too big on purpose. Christopher stood at the head of the table in a sharp charcoal suit, looking like a man who already believed he'd won. He gave a speech about legacy, about sacrifice, about how much it hurt him to say what he was about to say. Then he opened a folder and slid copies down the table, a full neurological report with my name on it, stamped by Dr. Owen Castile, diagnosing me with rapid, early-onset cognitive decline, fabricated brain scans, fake test scores, a man's medical license used as a weapon against his own patient's father-in-law's boss, whichever way you wanted to say it, used against me. "I'm asking the board," Christopher said, voice cracking right on cue, "to invoke the incapacity clause for my father's protection and for the company's." The room went quiet. A few directors wouldn't look at me. One actually reached over and patted my hand like I was already gone. I let the silence sit there a moment longer than it needed to. Then I stood up straight, no shake in my hands, no confusion in my voice, and asked Christopher one question. "Did Dr. Castile examine me himself, or did he examine a $40,000 wire transfer from Everline Consulting?" The color left his face so fast I almost felt bad. Almost. I nodded toward the back doors. They opened, and Kian walked in, not alone. 2 federal agents from the Financial Crimes Division walked in behind him, and behind them, pale and sweating, clutching a leather folder like it might save him, was Dr. Castile himself. Turns out a man with a suspended license and a gambling debt doesn't hold up well under federal pressure. He'd been wearing a wire for 6 days. The room exploded into noise, directors flipping through the fake diagnosis with their hands shaking now instead of mine. Christopher standing frozen at the head of the table, mouth open, no sound coming out. One of the agents stepped forward and read off what they had: wire fraud, falsified medical records, conspiracy to commit involuntary incapacitation of a company executive. Then he turned to Kian, who nodded once. Kian stood and addressed the board calmly. "Before anyone votes on anything, there's something else you should know. Christopher personally signed a $15 million loan this week using a contaminated property the state flagged 3 weeks ago as a hazardous remediation site. He structured it specifically to keep Phillips Development off the paperwork." A director near the end of the table actually laughed, a short, disbelieving bark, like the whole thing was too absurd to be real. "So the company isn't liable, but Christopher is, personally. All $15 million of it, plus federal cleanup penalties, attached to his own name and a shell company owned by his mother-in-law." I watched my son's knees buckle. He grabbed the table to stay upright. "Dad," he said, and his voice sounded like somebody much younger. "Dad, please." I didn't answer him right away. I let him stand there in front of the people who used to respect him, in the silence he'd built for himself. Then the doors at the back of the room banged open again. Danielle and Zara were rushing in, and Zara was holding a bottle of champagne, already smiling, clearly expecting to walk into a celebration. She froze the second she saw the federal agents. The bottle slipped out of her hand and shattered on the boardroom floor. Champagne pooled across the hardwood floor, soaking into Zara's expensive shoes. Nobody moved to clean it up. Every eye in that boardroom was on her now instead of Christopher. "What is this?" she said, voice sharp, still trying to sound like a woman in control. "Christopher, what did you do?" Christopher didn't answer. He was still gripping the edge of the table, staring at the federal agents like they might disappear if he looked hard enough. I walked over, slow, my footsteps the only sound in the room besides the drip of champagne off the table edge. "Zara," I said, "Everline Consulting, registered under your name. $840,000 in fraudulent invoices to my company. 40,000 of that went straight to a neurologist you hired to lie about my mind." I looked at Danielle next. She'd gone white, backing toward the wall. "You knew. Every text, every call. Alexander has all of it." Danielle started crying, saying she never signed anything, she wasn't part of it. Maybe that was true. It didn't matter much anymore. Her name wasn't on the fraud, but her husband's was, and her mother's was, and the house she loved so much, the one Christopher mortgaged to fund his $15 million mistake, was already flagged for foreclosure. The bank had called that morning once the loan officer saw the state's contamination notice attached to the property. One of the federal agents stepped toward Christopher and asked him to stand and place his hands behind him. The sound of the cuffs closing was the loudest thing I'd heard in that room all day. Christopher looked at me over his shoulder, tears running down his face now, not performing anymore. "Dad, please, you have to help me. You're my father." I thought about the steakhouse, the lie about permits, the laughing. He's basically checked out, doesn't have a clue. "You stopped being my son the day you decided I was worth more to me diagnosed than loved," I said. "I hope the food in federal prison is better than the excuse you gave me on my birthday." They led him out first, then Zara, both of them still shouting things I didn't bother listening to. Danielle wasn't arrested, no signature, no paper trail with her name on it, but she left the building that afternoon with nothing but the clothes on her back. The house was gone within the month, so was every account tied to Christopher's name, seized as restitution once the fraud charges were filed, along with the embezzlement and forged medical record charges. I sat with Keon in my office after the room finally cleared out. He didn't say much, just poured 2 glasses of water, because neither of us wanted the bourbon that night. "You could have called the police the day you found the first transaction," he said. "Would have saved you a lot of stress. Would have saved him a lot of consequences, too," I said. I wasn't interested in easy for him. I was interested in real. Over the next few weeks, I did exactly what I told Keon I would. I had the company bylaws rewritten so no incapacity clause could ever be weaponized like that again. Real second and third medical opinions required, outside counsel involved from day one. I redirected the shares that would have gone to Christopher into an employee ownership program for the people who'd actually built this company alongside me for the last 2 decades. Jennifer cried when I told her. 20 years of loyalty finally meant something on paper. I also set up a small scholarship fund through the company. Nothing flashy, just enough to help a few kids from nothing get a real shot at building something, the way nobody handed me anything back in 1984. Alexander sent me his final invoice with a note attached. "Hope the rest is easier than this was." I framed it. Strange thing to frame, maybe, but it felt earned. Christopher took a plea deal eventually. 8 years, restitution he'll be paying off long after he's out. Zara got 6, on top of losing her own house once the fraud judgments came through. Dr. Castile lost his license permanently and is looking at his own sentence for the falsified records. Danielle moved out of state. I heard she's working retail somewhere in Arizona. I don't know if that's true. I stopped checking. People ask me sometimes if I regret how far I let it go before I stopped it. I don't. I think about all those years I gave Christopher everything. The cars, the title, the house,
the benefit of every doubt, because I thought that was what love looked like. Turns out, I was just building a man who thought he could get away with anything, including erasing his own father to keep the money coming. I'm 70 years old. I built an empire out of a rusted truck and cold nights on a construction site, and I built it clean. Nobody, not even my own blood, gets to convince a room full of people that I'm not sharp enough to protect what I made. Love your family. Trust them with everything you can. But the second they mistake your generosity for weakness, remember, some men spend 40 years learning how to survive exactly this kind of betrayal, and they don't forget how.